Have you ever felt that strange burn in your chest when someone completely misrepresents what you said? Not just a misunderstanding. No, something worse. The kind of twist that turns your words into a weapon aimed right back at you. You said something calm, even helpful, but by the time it reached their mouth again, it had transformed into something cruel, manipulative, absurd. You try to explain, you try to untangle their version from your truth, but it doesn't work. The more you try to defend yourself, the deeper you sink into a swamp of confusion and frustration. And somewhere in that spiral, you realize something quietly horrifying. The moment you start defending yourself against words you never actually said, you've already lost. And that loss, it's not always loud. It doesn't come with a slam of a door or the sound of voices raised. Sometimes it's just the way your heart sinks, the way you look around and realize everyone in the room believes the twisted version, not yours. The way doubt creeps in, not about what you said, but about whether anyone ever really listened to you in the first place. That's the trap. That's the game manipulators play. They twist, they distort, they reshape truth into something they can use against you. And when you reach out trying to grab hold of it again, they've already moved the finish line. You're not arguing with logic anymore. You're arguing with their version of events. You're playing a game you didn't agree to, with rules you didn't write, and an opponent who doesn't care about fairness. And if you're not careful, you'll spend your energy trying to convince someone of a truth they never intended to see. So how do you stop it? First, you have to understand why they do it. It's not always malicious on the surface. Sometimes it looks like confusion. Sometimes it wears a mask of sensitivity or concern. But deep down, it's always about control. Control over the conversation. Control over how others see you. Control over your emotions. Because people who twist your words know one thing. Perception beats reality. They don't need to prove that you're wrong. They just need to convince others that you're unreasonable, emotional, unstable, or cruel. And once they paint that picture, anything you say to defend yourself just adds more color to their canvas. It's a psychological trick, a deeply manipulative move that forces you onto the defensive. It makes them seem like the reasonable one, while you're left scrambling to untangle a web that never should have existed. And they do it for the reaction. They want you flustered. They want you upset, because then they get to say, see? Look how defensive you are. Look how emotional. They use your very humanity against you. I remember the first time it happened to me in a way I couldn't ignore. A conversation with a coworker that started with a simple statement, something as harmless as, I think we should try a different approach. That's it. Not accusatory, not aggressive, just an idea. But later that day, I overheard her telling others that I'd said her idea was stupid, that she didn't know what she was doing. It stopped me in my tracks. For a second, I questioned whether I had misspoken, whether I'd somehow been harsher than I realized. But no, I knew my words. I remembered the tone. I remembered the moment. She had twisted it completely. And my first instinct was to confront her, to explain, to correct. But as I opened my mouth to defend myself, I saw it. This slight smile, this flicker of satisfaction. She wasn't surprised that I was upset. She was counting on it. That moment taught me something I've never forgotten. When you argue with a lie, you give it life. That's when I learned the value of repeating my actual statement, not defending, not arguing, not explaining. Just calmly, clearly saying, here's what I said. No emotion, no embellishment, just the truth, laid bare. And then I let the silence do the rest. It doesn't always work right away. People who twist words are skilled at shifting the narrative. They'll push, they'll produce, they'll try to bait you into overreacting. But when you stand still, when you stay rooted in what you know to be true, something powerful happens. Their storm starts to lose its force. But there's something else I learned, not just about how to respond, but how to prepare. Because we live in a time where truth is more flexible than ever, where someone can say, "I never said that," and suddenly reality starts to bend. That's why memory isn't enough. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. Harsh? Maybe, but true. That's not about being paranoid. It's about being prepared. I've had moments where a simple text or email saved me from a week of stress. A short message like, "Just to confirm, we agreed on XYZ," can become a shield when someone tries to rewrite the story. Manipulators hate documentation. They thrive in ambiguity, in vague conversations they can later twist. But when you've got the receipts, screenshots, emails, notes, they lose their grip. Once, after being burned too many times, I made it a habit to follow up verbal conversations with a written summary. Not cold, not suspicious, just professional. And sure enough, the next time someone tried to claim I'd said something I hadn't, I forwarded the email where they had acknowledged it. Suddenly, the accusation stopped. Because the truth was no longer floating, it was anchored. The truth is, if someone gets angry when you want to keep a record of things, that's the clearest red flag you'll ever get. People who are honest have nothing to fear from documentation. But manipulators? They'll call you paranoid. They'll say you're controlling. They'll ask, "Why don't you just trust me?" And maybe for a while you did. Maybe that's how you got burned. But now you know better. Because the truth, your truth, shouldn't be fleeting. It shouldn't be something that disappears the moment someone else disagrees. That's what documentation does. It protects the truth. It keeps it from being erased by someone else's narrative. And sometimes the best way to shut down manipulation is to make the manipulator overreach. Not by fighting, not by yelling, but by playing dumb. It's a tactic that doesn't sound powerful on the surface. But it is, because manipulators expect you to react. They want your emotions. They want your confusion. But when you ask them to explain their twisted version of events, calmly, gently, as if you truly don't understand, suddenly the burden is on them. "Wait," you say, "how did you get that from what I said?" You tilt your head, you pause, you let them talk. And as they try to walk you through their twisted logic, they often stumble. They start revealing their inconsistencies. They look absurd, because the truth is, their version never made sense in the first place. It only worked because they never had to explain it. I've used this tactic more than once, and each time, the result is the same. The manipulator panics. They try to backtrack. They try to reframe, but it's too late. The room is watching now. The truth is unraveling. There's a moment after the confrontation, after the unraveling, where the silence speaks louder than anything else. You're standing there, heart still steady, breath calm, eyes locked, and they don't know what to do with your stillness. Manipulators are used to noise. They expect panic. They depend on your confusion to regain control. But when you respond with calm, with patience, with nothing but your truth, the game ends before it begins. Because now they're exposed, not with aggression, not with insults, but by the simple, unshakable strength of clarity. And here's what they don't see coming. Clarity doesn't argue. Clarity doesn't need to scramble. It doesn't get lost in loops of back and forth chaos. It just stands, rooted like a tree in the storm. It doesn't matter how loud the wind gets. It's not going anywhere. But don't think for a second that this kind of strength comes easy. It's forged in the fire of 100 smaller betrayals. You don't wake up one day and know how to calmly dismantle a manipulator's game. It comes after you've sat with yourself in the dark, after you've replayed conversations until your mind was raw, after you've questioned your own sanity because someone made you doubt the ground beneath your feet. It comes after being gaslighted so many times that the sound of your own voice saying, "Am I crazy?" it became too familiar. After nights spent wondering if maybe you were too sensitive, too emotional, too much. After years of trying to explain yourself to people who had no interest in understanding, only in winning. And then one day without warning, something inside you shifts. Maybe it's quiet at first. Maybe it's just a pause, a breath, a hesitation before the usual reaction. But that pause, that's the beginning. That's the crack in the pattern. That's the moment you realize you have a choice. Because reaction is habit, but response, that's power. And power begins with awareness. You start noticing the subtle digs disguised as jokes, the way they frame their lies in a soft tone, so you feel bad for doubting them. The way they make you the villain in stories where you were only trying to be kind. You start seeing how they sow confusion with precision, how they build narratives like houses of cards, beautiful on the surface, but one question makes them collapse. You begin collecting these moments not as evidence to fight with, but as knowledge to rise with. Because once you know the playbook, the game loses its grip. You stop trying to win it. You start walking away from it entirely. And the beautiful part, when you stop playing, they stop having power. When you don't react, when you don't engage, when you look at them with quiet, knowing eyes, they falter. Because their power was never in the truth, it was in your confusion. I remember one moment clearly, a conversation that would have broken me years ago. Someone I trusted tried to spin a lie into the center of a room, painting me as cold, indifferent, unkind. The words were deliberate. The tone was rehearsed. It was meant to stir me, to make me raise my voice, defend, explain, react. But I didn't. I just looked at them, steady, and said nothing. And the silence that followed, it was the loudest truth I had ever spoken. Because in that moment, I wasn't looking for validation. I wasn't hoping someone would defend me. I knew who I was. I knew what I had said. And I didn't need the approval of people who were too busy being entertained by the performance. That's the real win. Not the argument, not the revenge, but the ability to walk through fire and not let it burn your center. That's strength. That's grace. And you learn over time that not every attack deserves a counter. Some lies die in silence. Some battles are won by not stepping onto the field at all. Not because you're scared, but because you know the war is beneath you now. That doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. It means you choose your battles with precision. You learn to measure whether a fight will cost you more than it will reward you. You ask yourself, is this worth my energy, my peace, my time? Most of the time, the answer is no. So you protect your energy like sacred currency. Because you know now, there are people who feed on your reactions, who crave your chaos. They don't want peace, they want power. And if you give them your reaction, you give them exactly what they came for. So you don't. You give them silence. You give them stillness. You give them the sound of your absence. And that absence, it echoes. They'll talk about you. They'll twist your name. They'll try to rewrite the story. Let them. Let them have their version. Let them talk. Because while they're busy spinning lies, you're building truth. You're healing. You're growing. You're becoming someone who no longer fears being misunderstood. Because peace is not always being seen. It's being okay even when you're not. And you learn that the people who matter, the people who see you, feel your silence more than they ever felt your words. They don't need explanations. They know your character, they know your heart. And those who don't, they never mattered. You no longer chase explanations. You no longer hand out your truth like flyers in the wind. You carry it like a torch, quiet, warm, unwavering. And if someone is worthy, they'll feel the heat. And in this growth, you also learn not to become what hurt you. It's tempting, isn't it? To lie back, to manipulate back. to gaslight back. But that's not power, that's poison. Revenge might taste sweet in the moment, but it rots your spirit in the long run. So you don't stoop, you rise. You take all the lessons, all the pain, all the confusion, and you transmute it into wisdom, into strength, into silence that speaks volumes. And maybe you walk alone for a while. Maybe the silence grows heavy before it feels like freedom. Maybe the healing hurts before it heals. But you walk anyway, because you finally remembered that your worth isn't up for debate, that your truth doesn't need an audience, that your peace is your home. There's something sacred about the moment you choose to stop explaining yourself. It doesn't happen in a flash of defiance. It happens in quiet resolve. After too many conversations that ended in silence, after too many, "I didn't mean it like that," responses that never seem to change anything. It happens when you sit with yourself and realize that your voice has become tired, not from speaking, but from being ignored. You reach a point where you no longer feel the urge to correct every misinterpretation, every twist of your words, every accusation built from someone else's insecurity. You stop, not because you've given up, but because you've reclaimed your time. You begin to understand that not everyone deserves access to your clarity. That truth, when handed to the wrong hands, becomes ammunition. That vulnerability, when placed in untrustworthy spaces, becomes theater for someone else's control. You've learned this the hard way. You've handed over your heart only to see it dissected under someone else's microscope, examined not with care, but with the cold precision of judgment. And now you move differently. Not guarded, not closed, but discerning. Discerning doesn't mean you've lost your softness. It means you found your edges. It means you've learned to recognize the difference between those who ask questions because they care and those who ask questions because they're looking for cracks. You begin to see patterns. How the same people who twist your words often flatter you in the same breath. How they always seem to need you when you're most empty. How their presence comes with a price, your peace. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. You begin to notice how their concern always centers around their comfort. How their apologies never come without justification. How they only show up when your boundaries become inconvenient for them. It's subtle. It's manipulative, but it's clear now. And with that clarity, you choose something different. You stop giving people the benefit of the doubt when they've shown you their pattern. You stop hoping they'll change. You stop asking them to meet you where they refuse to go. You let them stay where they are, and you begin walking forward, not out of anger, but out of self-respect, because you've realized something simple but powerful. Staying in places where your truth is constantly questioned isn't loyalty. It's self-abandonment, and you've abandoned yourself long enough. You've done the work to be seen, to be known, to be heard. You've dug through your own patterns, faced your own shadows, cried through your own healing. You've done the hard, messy, sacred work of becoming. And now you understand that anyone who requires you to unbecome to stay is not your person, not your place, not your path. So you leave quietly. You don't announce it. You don't explain it. You don't list the reasons like a report card. You just go. And in that going, you find freedom. Not the kind that comes with fanfare or fireworks. The quiet kind. The kind that tastes like peace. That smells like your own breath in a quiet room. That feels like finally sitting down after years of standing for everyone else. And in that silence, you begin to hear yourself again. You hear your needs, your voice, your hunger for something real. Not perfect, not constant, but honest. You're no longer interested in relationships that thrive on confusion. You crave clarity now. You crave truth, even when it's hard. You crave the kind of love that listens with the intent to understand, not to reply. And while that love might be rare, it starts with you. You stop betraying yourself for comfort. You stop shrinking to avoid tension. You stop agreeing just to keep things smooth. You start telling yourself the truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, because you know that truth is the only place healing can happen. So you look at yourself fully, no filters, no excuses. You name the ways you've let others write your story. You forgive the version of you who didn't know better, who stayed, who explained, who hoped, who tried. And then you hold her hand and you tell her you did what you needed to do, but we're doing things differently now. Now, you move with integrity. You speak with clarity. You rest without guilt. You leave when your peace is threatened. You choose yourself, not because you're selfish, but because you finally understand that your soul was never meant to be negotiated. In this shift, it transforms everything. Your conversations become deeper. Your boundaries become clearer. Your decisions become less reactive. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you no longer depend on external approval to feel secure. You begin to live in alignment, not performance. And when you live like that, some people will fall away. Let them. Some people only love the version of you who kept quiet, who made things easy, who never asked for reciprocity. That version is gone now. She's not bitter. She's just done. Done explaining, done shrinking, done performing. And the people who remain, they're your people. The ones who respect your space, who honor your number, who celebrate your truth even when it's different from theirs. The ones who listen without trying to fix you, who sit in the silence without needing to fill it, who love you in your entirety, not just the parts that serve them. And as you build this new version of your life, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time. Ease. Not because everything is perfect, but because you're no longer pretending. You're no longer carrying stories that don't belong to you. You're no longer writing chapters with characters who won't even read the page. You're living fully, honestly, freely. And you finally realize that the cost of being misunderstood will never be greater than the cost of misunderstanding yourself. So you choose you again and again and again. And home doesn't entertain chaos, because when you stop fighting the lie and start questioning the logic, you take your power back. It begins in moments you don't expect, those quiet in-betweens, those stretches of silence where you're alone with your thoughts, no one calling your name, no one asking for a piece of you. That's when it arrives. The realization, the ache, the truth. You've spent so much time pouring into others that you never noticed your own cup had been running dry for years. It's a soft kind of devastation, the kind that doesn't scream, it whispers. You stare at your reflection and think, I don't even recognize myself anymore. You will remember when you used to laugh with your whole body. You remember when your eyes lit up at the smallest joys. You remember when love didn't feel like labor and silence didn't feel like punishment. But somewhere along the way, you traded those parts of yourself for something else. Approval maybe, acceptance, safety. And now the versions of you you've created to survive have started to suffocate the version of you that just wants to live. That's where the real work begins. Not in changing your hair or your clothes or your habits. Not in another book or another course or another checklist. It begins in the decision to come home to yourself, to reclaim the pieces of you that you tucked away to make room for everyone else's comfort. And coming home isn't easy because the house has changed. The furniture has been rearranged by others. Some rooms are locked, others filled with memories you swore you'd never revisit. But you walk in anyway, slowly, carefully, like you're greeting someone you haven't seen in years but never stop missing. And as you walk through, you notice it. The walls still hold your voice. The mirrors still remember your laughter. The foundation is still yours. You sit in the center of it all, knees pulled to your chest, and you begin the renovation, not by tearing everything down, but by whispering, "I'm sorry I left. I'm here now." And from that point forward, you start to live differently. You start listening to your body when it's tired instead of forcing it to perform. You start honoring your intuition even when it goes against logic. You start saying no, not because you're angry, but because your peace matters more than their approval. You stop entertaining what drains you, no matter how familiar it feels, because now you've remembered who you are. You remember that love doesn't require self-erasure, that silence isn't the same as peace, that boundaries are bridges to deeper connection, not walls meant to shut people out. You begin to understand that being alone doesn't mean you're unworthy, it means you're discerning. You no longer chase connection, you attract it by being fully rooted in yourself. And that rootedness becomes your compass. You no longer get lost in rooms that don't see you. You walk in with presence, with purpose, and if the space asks you to shrink, you simply leave. Not out of spite, but out of alignment. You've made a vow now to never again leave yourself to be loved. You'll never again beg for crumbs in places where your soul deserves a feast. And still you're kind. Still you're soft. But your softness is no longer a surrender. It's a stance. A decision to remain open without being walked over. You hold your tenderness like armor. You speak with care, but not caution. You show up fully, not because you need to prove anything, but because you've got nothing to hide anymore. This new version of you, the one who's returned, the one who remembers, it moves slower, it breathes deeper, it forgives without forgetting. It laughs without apology. It rests without guilt. And it no longer explains itself to people who twist your truth to fit their comfort. You realize now that peace isn't passive. It's a rebellion. In a world that thrives on chaos, on noise, on urgency, your peace is your protest. You protect it fiercely. You guard it like a sacred fire. You no longer let others dump their unprocessed emotions at your feet. You say, "I love you, but I'm not your fixer." You say, "I see you, but I won't lose myself to hold you." You say, "I care, but I cannot carry what's not mine." And when the guilt rises, because it will, you meet it with truth. You remind yourself that boundaries are not betrayals, that prioritizing yourself doesn't make you selfish, that walking away from what harms you is not cruelty, it's clarity. You don't explain, you don't defend, you just live. You breathe. You choose again and again to stay in alignment, even when it's lonely, because sometimes it will be. Sometimes choosing yourself means walking alone for a season, means quiet birthdays, means unanswered calls, means watching people you loved write you out of their story because you no longer fit the version of you they were comfortable with. Let them. You are no longer interested in being palatable. You are no longer twisting yourself into something digestible for people who refuse to chew on their own growth. You're not here to make others comfortable. You're here to live a life that feels like truth in your chest. And when it hurts, and it will, you don't run. You don't numb. You sit with it. You let the ache rise. You cry if you need to. You speak to yourself the way no one else ever did. "I'm proud of you," you whisper. "I see how hard you're trying. I see how brave you are. I see how far you've come." You become your own witness, and that changes everything. Because now your healing is no longer about proving anything to anyone. It's about reclaiming your life, your joy, your softness, your voice. You live not for applause, but for authenticity. You rise not for revenge, but for resurrection. You love not to be loved, but because love is who you are when you stop pretending. You've become someone who no longer fears their own depth, who doesn't shrink from solitude, who doesn't silence their truth to keep someone else from feeling uncomfortable. You've become someone who understands that healing isn't linear, but it is real. And the more you live in alignment, the more peace you find. Not perfection, peace. The kind that doesn't leave when the world feels heavy. The kind that stays even in the storm. The kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket and says, no matter what, you've got you now. And that knowing, that's everything. Healing isn't always soft. Sometimes it feels like fire, like watching parts of yourself burn to the ground while you sit silently, unable to stop it, unsure if anything good will grow from the ashes. Sometimes healing means admitting you were wrong, that you stayed too long, that you loved too loudly in places that never echoed your voice back. It means standing in front of the mirror and not recognizing the version of you who allowed so many pieces to be chipped away just to keep the peace. It means facing yourself without flinching. Because the truth is, most of us weren't taught how to protect ourselves emotionally. We were taught to keep the peace, to be nice, to make ourselves smaller so others wouldn't feel threatened, to absorb other people's moods as our responsibility. So we did. We became peacemakers in rooms filled with storm clouds. We became the soft place for everyone else to land, even when we had nowhere safe to collapse ourselves. And over time, it became normal, expected, even praised. But now you've started questioning that. You're waking up in the middle of your own life and wondering when you agreed to carry so much. When did love start feeling like exhaustion? When did care turn into obligation? When did giving become your identity? That's where the healing starts. Not in fixing everything overnight, but in asking those questions with compassion. In realizing that you were never wrong for being soft, for caring deeply, for giving generously. You were just offering it to people who mistook it for weakness. And now, the work is learning how to keep your softness without giving it all away. How to love without losing. How to care without collapsing. And that's not easy. Because the moment you start setting boundaries, people push back. They call you cold, distant, selfish. They say you've changed. But the truth is, you're just returning to yourself. And not everyone will celebrate that, especially the ones who benefited from your silence. So you grieve. You grieve the roles you outgrew, the dynamics that no longer serve you, the people who can't meet you in your new level of awareness. And grief, as it turns out, isn't just for death. It's for every goodbye you never thought you'd say. To friendships, to family patterns, to old versions of you that you wore like armor. There's no blueprint for this process. Some days you'll feel strong, grounded, clear. Other days it'll feel like you're falling apart all over again. That's the nature of healing. It moves in spirals, not straight lines. You revisit the same wounds, but from a higher perspective. You cry the same tears, but with deeper understanding. You break open again, but with more grace. And through it all, you start becoming someone you respect. Someone who no longer over-apologizes, who says no without explaining, who rests without guilt, who leaves the room when the energy is wrong, who stops over-explaining their feelings to people who mock them, who stops over-performing for love that doesn't know how to stay. You stop showing up to be seen. You start showing up because you see yourself now. And seeing yourself, that changes everything. You start choosing differently. You choose peace over performance, stillness over struggle, presence over productivity. You choose the slow conversation over the loud one, the honest answer over the easy lie, the boundary over the burning. And yes, sometimes it's lonely. Sometimes you'll miss the version of your life where you didn't know any better, where it was simpler, even if it was painful. But now you can't unsee. You can't unknow. You can't return to what you've outgrown, no matter how nostalgic the comfort may feel. So instead, you keep walking forward, even when your legs shake, even when your voice trembles, even when your heart aches, because you've seen what it's like to abandon yourself and you've promised you'll never do it again. And that promise, it's sacred. It's what guides you through the moments when you want to reach back out, when the silence feels too loud, when the old habits try to sneak back in. You remember that your healing isn't about proving anything. It's about staying true to yourself, even when no one is watching, especially then. You begin to build rituals around your peace. You create space in your day for nothingness, for breath, for slowness. You stop rushing to respond to every ping, every text, every demand. You start honoring your energy. You start saying, I need a moment, without guilt. You stop performing productivity and start embodying presence. And the more you do this, the more you notice how different your life starts to feel. You no longer wake up with dread. You no longer tolerate disrespect masked as jokes. You no longer play the role of emotional caretaker in every room. You no longer feel the need to fix what isn't yours. You start allowing things to unfold. You let people show you who they are without trying to convince them to be better. You let go, gently, without bitterness. And that letting go, it becomes a habit, not of apathy, but of wisdom. You stop chasing closure. You stop writing long texts that explain your pain in perfect detail. You stop needing someone to understand you in order to feel valid, because you understand you. You sit with yourself at the end of the day and say, you did well. You showed up. You kept your promise. And that's enough, more than enough. Because this version of you, the one who chooses honesty over harmony, the one who loves without losing, the one who protects their peace like a sacred fire, that version of you is here to stay. You begin to understand that the relationship you have with yourself sets the standard for every relationship you have with others. It becomes painfully obvious when someone crosses a boundary you once wouldn't have noticed. You feel it in your body, a tension in your chest, a tightness in your throat, a resistance in your gut. And suddenly, where you used to stay silent, you now pause. Where you used to laugh it off, you now go quiet. Where you used to keep the peace, you now choose yourself. It isn't always dramatic. In fact, most of it is subtle. It's how you begin walking away from conversations that don't feel safe. It's how you stop responding to messages that carry a weight you're not meant to hold. It's how you no longer offer your time as a consolation prize to people who only reach out when they need something. You've learned the cost of emotional debt. You've lived in the red for too long, pouring from an empty cup, smiling through clenched teeth, convincing yourself that love was about how much you could tolerate. But now you know better. You know love isn't meant to drain you. Love isn't meant to be confusing. It's not meant to require endless explanations, second-guessing, or performance. Real love, the kind that nourishes rather than depletes, feels like rest. It feels like being able to exhale. It feels like being able to speak without editing. It feels like home, not like a test. So you stop chasing the kind of love that's full of conditions. You stop bending to fit someone else's mold. You stop handing over pieces of yourself in the hopes that someone will finally see you. You realize now that anyone who needs you to shrink to feel big was never meant to walk beside you. Instead, you walk alone for a while. Not because you're broken, not because you've given up, but because solitude has become your sanctuary. You stop seeing loneliness as lack and begin to see it as space. Space to breathe, to reflect, to create. You begin to enjoy your own company, not in a performative way, not in a way that says, look how okay I am, but in a grounded, gentle way that whispers, I trust myself now. And in that trust, you begin to heal. You stop asking everyone else what they think. You stop crowdsourcing your self-worth. You stop letting the reactions of others decide how you feel about yourself. You start building your self-concept from the inside out. You realize that validation is fleeting when it comes from people who don't even know your heart. And so, you become your own mirror, your own compass, your own safe place. This doesn't mean you stop loving others. Quite the opposite. It means your love becomes purer, clearer, more intentional, because you're no longer loving from a place of lack. You're not giving to get anymore. You're giving because you're full, because your love overflows. Not because you're trying to earn something in return. And if the love isn't returned, that's okay. You don't chase, you don't convince, you don't beg, because your love is a gift, not a transaction. You stop fighting for places that don't feel like home. You stop begging for answers from people who only ever responded with silence. You stop trying to resuscitate relationships that were built on your silence. And when you finally walk away, you do so with a kind of grace you never knew you had. Because now your peace is more valuable than their comfort. You start investing in the little things. You water your plants, you cook your meals with intention. You take your time in the morning. You journal your feelings. You sit in the sun. You drink water. You stretch your body. You take care of your space. And slowly, your space begins to feel like a reflection of your healing. Clean, warm, yours. You stop comparing your path to anyone else's. You understand now that healing isn't a race. There is no deadline, no finish line, only moments. Moments where you show up for yourself when it would have been easier not to. Moments where you speak your truth even when your voice shakes. Moments where you take one more step forward when everything in you wants to retreat. You begin to celebrate those moments. You stop waiting for the big wins to feel proud. You start celebrating the quiet victories. The text you didn't send, the phone call you didn't answer, the breath you took before reacting, the boundary you held even when it hurt. And through these moments, you build something unshakable, self-respect. You begin to realize that respect isn't about control. It's not about being feared. It's not about always being right. It's about how you treat yourself, especially when no one's watching. It's about the tone you use when you speak to yourself, the grace you extend when you make a mistake, the kindness you choose when your inner critic gets loud. Because the more you respect yourself, the less you tolerate what dishonors you. You stop explaining your boundaries like you're asking for permission. You stop over-apologizing for your emotions. You stop sacrificing your values to keep others comfortable. You start seeing your needs as valid, your truth as sacred, your presence as enough. You begin to let go of guilt. Guilt for growing, guilt for saying no, guilt for choosing yourself, guilt for leaving places you were never meant to stay. You hold your own hand through the discomfort. You remind yourself, I'm not wrong for choosing peace. I'm not wrong for needing more. I'm not wrong for saying this doesn't feel right anymore. And in the quiet of that truth, you hear something powerful. Your own voice, steady, clear, certain. Not because everything is perfect, but because you are finally listening, finally trusting, finally allowing yourself to lead. You no longer ask the world to give you what you weren't willing to give yourself. You stop hoping someone will choose you in the ways you've neglected to choose yourself. You stop waiting for someone else to come save you, because you've become the one who shows up now, for yourself. Every time, you begin to notice that your healing doesn't only transform how you feel about yourself, it shifts how you see the world. What used to feel like personal attacks now register as projections. Where you once internalized criticism, you now pause and ask, is this actually mine to carry? You no longer accept every emotion handed to you. You inspect it. You hold it up to the light. You weigh it against your truth. And if it doesn't fit, you lay it down without guilt. It's a level of awareness that feels like waking up in a room you didn't realize you were asleep in. Suddenly, conversations you used to engage in feel shallow. Spaces that once felt like comfort now feel like cages. You find yourself standing still in the middle of familiar rooms and realizing you've outgrown them. Not because they changed, but because you did. And the most profound part, you're not angry about it anymore. You're not bitter. You're not yelling at the walls, you're just done. Quietly, gracefully. Done with pretending. Done with stretching yourself to fit into places that can't hold your expansion. Done with making yourself smaller to keep the peace. You've stopped arguing to be understood. You've stopped explaining your pain to people who only hear what supports their narrative. You no longer invite people into your inner world unless they've proven they can be gentle with it. That's not coldness, it's wisdom. Because not everyone who wants access to you deserves a key. You begin to value your solitude not as a space of lack, but as a space of alignment. You're no longer afraid to be alone because you've realized being alone with your truth is better than being surrounded by people who ask you to silence it. You learn to sit with yourself without needing distractions. You learn to listen without immediately needing to fix. You learn to feel without numbing. And in that sacred silence, you hear things you never heard before. You hear your intuition, no longer muffled by the noise of people-pleasing. You hear your body whisper what it needs, not just physically, but emotionally. You hear the difference between a connection that energizes you and one that depletes you. You hear your soul, soft, steady, wise. And when someone walks into your life now, you listen differently. You no longer listen to respond. You listen to understand. You observe more than you speak. You watch how people carry their own emotions, how they treat your silence.